Karin, what can I say? It's always an absolute pleasure having you back. I have to say, I'm getting so used to these podcasts that we have together that when a week passes and we don't have one, I almost suffer from withdrawal symptoms. So thank you. Thanks for coming back.
I miss you too. I miss you too. Yes.
Wonderful. That's great to hear. And yeah, I mean, as always, with our very flexible talks, you suggested another fantastic topic for us, very different to what we've talked about in the past, but then again, in many ways, also very similar, depending on the perspective you take. So your suggestion was that we talk about courage.
Courage is not daredevil action. It's not lack of fear. It's resistance and not settling in and going into utter despair. So I'm trying to surround it by that which it is not. And maybe I can start with my own experience where there was fear, because fear is the initiation of courage, either your own or the fear of those you care for or those you want to help. I was thinking back during the first years of my life when the war was raging, and the only thing I saw was bombs and the German counter-action. So the sky was always alight, and I didn't like it, but I was at the same time I couldn't stay away from it, because going into darkness, meaning going into the basement, was worse. And a friend of my father's kind of helped me by rewriting a little verse for the land of milk and honey. And it ended, if the enemy comes in, they will sink in the rice that surrounds you and that will protect you. A child with the imagination of a mountain of rice where one could hide was all I needed to stop the fear, basically. At least the fear for myself, not necessarily for my family, but it got me through life with a feeling of, if there's some danger, I get very, very cool and collected. I may break apart after it's all over, but I can act and I can think straight. So I'm lucky in that sense, but I've seen many, many who had the opposite reaction, and I always felt sorry for them, but maybe they felt sorry for me, because fear is a very irrational and rational reaction to scary things. And if you don't scare, you may be in greater danger than those who kind of give in to fear. But then the next situations where there was danger, it wasn't the danger for me, but it was the danger for the people we were caring for, our colleagues who were under political pressure, or who were under threat of life. And I had to react. And I could react very coolly, very straightforward. I've driven friends from Germany to Prague to the then Congress while they were under threat of death from the PKK. And we had talked to the police. The police was there every 50 kilometers. They were waiting for us in the center of the Autobahn, the highway. That other people said, you know, how could you do that? Weren't you afraid? And I said, no. And so it wasn't courage. It was simply, I did what I had to do, period. No buts, no ifs. A similar thing happened later with a friend and colleague who was under threat of death by the Russian mafia, which was just as bad. And we got him out where he lived. He and his wife were handed over to me, and I could bring them to a safe place. We again had to talk to the police, and they were guarding them. But again, other people or even people close by said, you know, aren't you afraid? Isn't that dangerous? And I said, no, if you don't let them scare you, it's not dangerous. Later, I drove them again under police protection to another city where they found another safe place. And these things were normal. That to me was normal. I was not afraid. And this is when I was thinking, what is courage? Courage is the thing to do something although you're afraid. Daredevil actions, they are not afraid. That is doing things without really thinking about the fear or thinking about the dangers. And then you have those who respond with resistance, which takes courage, and others respond with utter despair and paralysis. And that to me is the resignation is something I cannot live within myself. I see it with people and I understand it utterly, but resignation is not the way I deal with life. That's impossible for me. So I have a great respect for all the resistance movements in France, the resistance movement in England, the partisan movement in former Yugoslavia against the Nazis. And that takes courage because you have to rely either on yourself if you're alone or on the movement, on the community that helps you do the right thing for the people who need you. That is courage. To me, only that is courage. So we could almost draw a line to the situation in Afghanistan today. What has been happening there has been an implosion of a country, a resignation into what they didn't want. And now we have the movement away from it, the flight away from it. And I'm sure that there are forces that are going to build resistance sometime because this theocracy, the threat of theocracy and absolute almost machismo is threatening not just to the people in the country who are not in line with the Taliban, but it threatens all of us around. I am thinking in terms of the parallels to the novels by Margaret Atwood. The Handmaid's Tale is the novel about a dystopia, the opposite of utopia. It has aspects of Nazism, of theocracy, of all the restrictive and anti-human kinds of societies that have existed and will exist. And you have basically a scenario that won't let you be surprised at what is happening in Afghanistan. And this is where I start out from. It's life, my own life. It's our experience today. It's the experience in many cultures, in many at many different times, and also in literature. And this is why I'm really upset, and having worked with a lot of Afghans writers and for many years, maybe not as closely as with colleagues from other countries, but I know what they have been going through. I know what they are going through. I know what those who found refuge, for instance, in Germany, went through when, although they were integrated and had a job and had done everything that was expected of them, were resettled in Afghanistan, and there they are now. And this is where my heart goes.
I mean, I'm not going to play devil's advocate with you, because generally speaking, playing devil's advocate is to challenge the person with whom you are communicating, and that's not my approach at all, especially not with you.
Yes, you can. Yes, please do.
I'm sure I can, but because I'm more than convinced of your intellectual capacity to respond and cut me down. So my awareness of my fear there would prevent me from doing that. But I mean, I started today with one of my sessions, and I talked about a letter written by Zahra Karimi, who is a female director of Afghani origin. Actually, she's the head of Afghanistan's film industry, as it were, of the state-owned film company, established in 1968. And she wrote about her intense fear as to what will the consequences be for the arts, for artists, but obviously she specifically mentioned women, girls, and people who had perhaps operated with international organizations, and this was her fear with regards to the sort of forthcoming Taliban government. But then just before we began our talk, the Taliban held a press conference. I don't know if you...
I saw some of it.
Yeah, okay. So the spokesman, Zabihullah Mujahid, I apologize for my pronunciation, but some of the quotations of his, I think, deserve mention. So we are committed to the media within our cultural framework. Okay? Nothing should be against Islamic values. You in the media should pay attention to our shortcomings so we can serve the nation. Okay, so this is the language there is reconciliatory. It's not aimed at provocation. It is saying, take a measured approach to us. I would like to assure the media that we are committed to the media within our cultural frameworks. Private media can continue to be free and independent. He goes on to say, the youth who have grown up here, we do not want them to leave. They are our assets. Furthermore, we have pardoned everybody for the benefit of stability or peace in Afghanistan. And one more quotation with regards to women, that women would be entitled to work and study, he also mentioned, within the frameworks of our Islamic laws. So they're definitely
Sharia.
good.
Right.
Yeah, under Sharia law, absolutely. Yes.
Yes.
So yeah, I mean, it's not perhaps the aggressive tone that we perhaps had come to expect from them. He did also mention in an earlier statement that we are not the same Taliban that people saw between 1996 and 2001. He said since then we have had time to mature and to reflect, and people will see that this is a different government than that which people saw before. So there is an element there
The
which
tone
indicates
is different. Absolutely. The tone
Yeah.
is different. I don't quite trust it. I want to see what they do, not what they say.
Absolutely. Yeah. But this is the case also of our own Western governments.
Of course.
Yeah, as in, because I mean, unfortunately, we do have this. What's the best way of saying it? Yeah, this inherent mistrust of politicians because all they care about is being re-elected, isn't it? Isn't they will make whatever promise is necessary to get the votes, and then thereafter it doesn't matter.
I'm absolutely in accord with you on the level that the Taliban's tone has changed. I'm not quite sure whether the change is substantial. I'm not slapping our politicians on the back because they have failed not just Afghanistan over the last 20 years or even before the Russians were there, the French were there. Afghanistan has been rolled over so many times. I'm surprised they can still breathe. And much of that is should be chalked up on our Western political scale. That's not. I'm not defending anything that comes from the other side, but I'm wary of outright believing what they say. Let me put it that way. And I said the older I got, the more opinionated I'm getting.
Which is wonderful. But yeah, I mean, but you're completely right. I think it's fair to say. I mean, the proof is in the pudding. And, you know, people are kind of focused pretty much on the Taliban's initial steps. It doesn't necessarily bode well for the, should we say, the established government of Afghanistan when they, okay, it's unfair to say turn tail and run, but the president left while members of his government were negotiating with the Taliban, and and they didn't know he'd left until after he'd left, and that doesn't really sit right, does it?
It didn't sit right for weeks before when the Taliban were taking over or were invited to take over one city after the other without any kind of countermeasures, neither politically nor militarily. No, the Afghan government really collapsed. This is what I call implosion. It was retraction of everything they had. And if you think of what went in there in terms of particularly military and training, police training, for years and years from all sides, that there was no resistance whatsoever. Even when there was fighting, there was no resistance from the Afghan army.
Wouldn't this reflect, however, the loss of faith in their own government. Because if I put myself in a position of a soldier, if I sincerely believe that my government is there for my people, then I have a feeling that
Absolutely.
I will
Yes.
give my life to that government. But
Yes.
if I
Yes.
know that, look, the guy sitting 100, 300, 500 miles away from me, safe in his palace, doesn't give a damn.
No,
So
you're
then
right.
why
You're
would I
right.
fight for that person?
I'm not blaming the soldiers. I'm blaming the government,
Mm,
those in power, because the soldiers act on order. They do not go anywhere without order. We even see it with the Taliban. The Taliban order was don't fight, coming into Kabul, for
mm,
instance, now.
yep.
And like good soldiers, they went in and did not fight. Okay, there were some fights, and they were starting to check where the personnel, the Afghan personnel of foreign embassies were hidden away, basically, to get them out safely. Of course, they would go in there trying to secure their power base. All of this is absolutely normal, and it's fine. I'm just not holding my breath. I
Yeah, I
don't
think
know
that's
what's going to happen. We 6 months after today, we should talk again about this situation.
Oh, I'm sure we will. I'm sure we will. I've read many medieval histories where there have been battles, there have been sieges, and the attacking army has eventually entered the city, and the soldiers that went in, the officers obviously stayed out, let the soldiers do whatever they needed to do,
Mm-hmm.
and in sacking a town or city, they then gathered up the spoils, and invariably those spoils were not only gold or silver, but they also took the people that they wanted to take and did what they did with them. So um, this appears to be one of the most unfortunate elements of war and conflict that has developed for thousands of years. So it was refreshing, and I don't want anybody to think that I'm pro-Taliban. I'm not pro or anti anybody in an arena which I do not understand. And Afghanistan is definitely an arena I do not understand enough to be able to voice too much of an opinion. Um, but yeah, the fact that they sent in initially unarmed soldiers, I'm hopeful. It bodes well. It may not, as you say, in 6 months, when the dust has settled, when the government has formed, and when life has sort of adjusted to its new method, then we will be able to look at it and say whether or not this was better or worse for Afghanistan than the government that existed before.
We'll see. We'll
Yeah.
see. No, I was very happy that their tone changed, that their action now changed, going into city after city. I have problems with theocracy because the rules that are applied cannot be challenged from inside, and they cannot be challenged from the outside. Democratic rules can be challenged from the in and the outside, and autocratic rules cannot.
Mm.
And this is where I'm hanging in between there, I must say.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
this is if I knew straight away what to think and how to think in terms of the future, I'd be happier.
Sure, of course. I mean, it does also, bring to light the question, is democracy in itself an exportable good? Because I am unconvinced. As in, I've also read the quotation, democracy, it's a terrible system, but it's the best one that we've got at the moment.
Mhm.
You know, in some ways, I agree. In some ways, I say, well, actually, we don't really have democracy. We haven't had a democracy in over 2,000 years. What we have is representative democracy. It's not quite the same thing.
Right.
And people tend to overlook that, that slight difference with the terminology.
And right now we have democracies, and you see how different they are.
Absolutely.
And there is not one system that you can really see that covers everything that ideally should be covered by democracy. And we have types of or approaching systems, or systems approaching democracy, but we don't have democracy. It's pretty much the same it was with communism. We had systems approaching communism, but we never had a communist, a real communist government anywhere.
No, and even after popular revolutions, where the idea was to move the reins of power away from the elite and more towards the people, this was soon somehow manipulated, and either a completely new elite was introduced, or a new face was introduced, which was still subservient to the previous elite, but not quite as obviously. I'm kind of talking about the French Revolution. I'm talking about the revolution, which I suppose they call it the Great Revolution in England, which took place before, which took off the king's head as well at the time, and yet the monarchy was sort of still continued. Yes, they changed the orientation a bit. They gave more powers to Parliament, but the elite was still the same as that which existed before
for hundreds of years.
Yeah. And the French Revolution was the same. They killed the king, but then they installed an emperor, and so you just simply went from one elite to another.
Yeah, this French Revolution basically was used as the model for all revolutions, saying or the analysis of the French Revolution said that every revolution has three phases: the revolution, the counter-revolution, and the turmoil. So the massacre, the massacres of those who were the revolutionaries was the third type of massacre during that revolution. The first massacre was in the spheres of the old elite, and then came the elite that wanted to come up after the monarchy. And then the third massacre was among the revolutionaries themselves.
Yeah.
And then they switched to another empire.
Yeah. So it seems to me to be the case that democracy is a very good introduction for those who can, seize the moment, as it were, fly into power, and assume control in the name of the people, establish a system which allows them to essentially forever maintain control. And yet the most successful ones are those systems which somehow manage to convince the people that they are working on their behalf.
Yes.
Yeah. And so, we're still at the point that we don't have a democracy.
Right. Well, to some degree, what really keeps me thinking I want democracy is I want the free press, I want freedom of expression, and I want habeas corpus, the English version from 1066. I want the freedom to live for everybody.
Yeah, the right to live, the human right.
Yes.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, as you say, habeas corpus has since been altered a little bit in the light of terrorism. So
Oh,
therefore, they've
yes.
said that if people are tried under the law, or if they are potentially guilty of having committed an act of terrorism, then habeas corpus can be suspended for a specific period of time. But then again, there are some people who have remained in incarceration for a number of weeks, if not months, without any charge.
Yes.
And yeah, I think Julian Assange currently is one such person who is in jail without having actually been charged or even convicted of any kind of crime. So yeah, I agree with you.
Yes. Well, his resistance was he went there with open eyes. He resisted by opening up the archives that really called the government to the American government to task.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the interesting elements is that a person who benefited from the release of many of the documents that came later on in the period of WikiLeaks, Donald Trump, he pursued Assange. He wanted to have him extradited, and he wanted to have him tried in an American court, even though he benefited from that, because Julian Assange also was a key figure in the 2016 election when releasing certain emails pertaining to Hillary Clinton.
Absolutely.
So there is a lot of, the story there isn't clear either, because there is this a British politician who, I won't name him, but I mean he's a friend of Trump's, but who was also seen entering the Ecuadorian embassy to speak with Assange. So
yes, I love him. I love him. Yes.
Yeah. So there is a lot of the story that we don't really know either.
There is no straightforward justice.
No. Absolutely
and there's
not.
no straightforward democracy, and there's no straightforward humanism. I think we start from the premises that we can have or we can build the ideal. We will never be able to build an ideal world or even live by our ideal program. We have to remain flexible and look at the world again basically every 4 weeks. It has changed by that time.
Yeah, it's amazing how quickly.
Yes.
Does it not that this is the case? But what I also find is, through conversations with you, through some of the material that I'm sort of encouraged to read, I tend to understand things in a different way. I see my eyes open, to realities that they're not new realities. They're realities that have always existed, but that I was incapable of seeing. And I find that in itself fascinating.
Reality has so many perspectives that we shouldn't be surprised that we have one perspective and then all of a sudden discover a different one. I discovered a different one yesterday. I'm still mulling over what a friend of mine was talking about, saying, he doesn't think that the translators should be brought out of the country because they worked against their own people, and I don't see that. I'm still debating in my mind with that friend who was sure that they were basically doing the same thing that the dissidents in the GDR were doing. Checking on their own family and reporting it to the ministry.
A bit like the Stasi, you mean?
Yes, yes. And to me, the translators in Afghanistan are no Stasi group.
Yeah, I mean, you know, there are many different cases in history where you can say it's no longer a defense to say I was following orders. Yeah, as in, I know you alluded to this earlier with regards to military personnel. You know, but when we're talking about, for example, a crime against humanity, as has been established with regards to genocides and so on, you know, that is not a defense to say I was just following orders. And that's,
No.
I think that's an established principle which we can agree with. What these translators perhaps were doing, can that be categorized in the same way? I'm not sure. I
No.
don't think it would be fair to do so. And also, we've got to, you know, identify Afghanistan. It's a poor country for the majority of the people. They, you know, and if you can establish a skill or an opportunity which allows you to feed your family, allows you to grow within society, then, you know, only, you know, there are not many people who would say, no, I'm sorry, I'm not going to do that.
International communication would not be possible without translators and interpreters, as world literature wouldn't be world literature without translated literature. It's not that I would defend every translator or writer who informed, in a way, the foreign embassies or the foreign forces about what was going on inside their country. I'm sure that you have all kinds, like everywhere in the world, you have all kinds of reasons. One is material. I want to feed my family. The other one is I want some kind of better life for all of us, meaning look at the West. They have such a good life. It would be lovely to have similar situations. So if we help them, they help us, and maybe they help us also get a better life here. I have the feeling that many of the translators had been outside of the country because their English or their German, from what I hear, or also their French, was excellent. It was not learned in Afghanistan without close contact to native speakers. So there's also a intercommunication in terms of political and cultural aspects between translators and those they translate for and with. So their eyes are wider open.
And there, I mean, Lena was telling me about a German CDU politician who wanted to send home, and by home I mean back to Afghanistan, a number of refugees and asylum seekers. And upon his 66th birthday, apparently the plane that returned had carried 66 Afghanis, and he considered this a gift. I can't remember his name.
Our beloved Interior Minister. That's
yeah.
his name out.
No. Okay. So, I mean, this kind of statement is, I think, beneath a minister of any European country.
It's
but
not
I would
just
say
petty. It's awful.
it's horrific to play word games of this type with people's lives. But looking at the situation now, there shouldn't really be any doubt, should there, on what to do with Afghani refugees and asylum seekers? Should there?
That was the only positive aspect of what happened. I thought they won't send them back home again. Because there were quite a number of Afghans, young people who had learned German, who had jobs. They were trying to get into college or into kind of permanent jobs. They were sent back home. A friend of mine has been working closely with Afghan youth, So I got all that information and I suffered with them. They were sent home, and at that point it was already clear that something was going on, that they shouldn't be sent home. And then German politicians, I'm talking about German politicians because I know what their arguments were. They said, any Afghan youth who went counter our law can be sent back. And that's what they did.
Yeah. And the thing is, when I mean, there's no way that the German government, or indeed any Western government, was unaware of the developing crisis in Afghanistan. I'm sure they said, if we don't send these guys back, or as many as we can back soon, after a certain point, we will no longer be able to justify it. So I'm pretty sure they got as many out as they could, and yeah. I'm not sure as to how safe those people will continue to be, even though the Taliban has promised that there will be no
There will be
mass arrests. Yeah.
Yeah, no, they won't. The Afghans here will not be sent back. That there's an embargo on their repatriation. Yes, I'm sure that they knew something was coming and something was going to stop them being able to send them back. It shows, I saw the news today that German government said we were in touch with all other governments, Western governments, our allies, and the United States, and we had decided not to evacuate our personnel before yesterday. They knew weeks ago from their embassies how dangerous it was going to be. And they all joined together and said, we'll wait until it really is necessary. And this is something I don't understand. That's political suicide.
Mm. I mean, the unfortunate thing is that there are so many precedents have already been established where the politicians come up with a sentence of some form which justifies an action or an inaction. And there is some kind of logic, there is some kind of purpose to what they are saying, but they can only do this because most people are unaware of the complete story.
Yes.
So if being ignorant in many ways with regards to the details, and if I am inclined to believe the representatives of my democratically elected government, then I'm going to believe some of the crap that they come out with. On the other hand, if if there is a slight bit of doubt, then I'm going to try to read between the lines, and I'm going to say, 1 minute, you're pulling the wool over my eyes, because you're sitting there comfortably in your very plush media offices, and you're telling me that you think it was better to leave your employees at the hands of a potentially, not necessarily, but potentially aggressive enemy that you've been fighting for 20 years.
Absolutely. And this we are so humane. We want all our translators and also our co-workers of the press. We want all of those out, and maybe even get all the women activists out because they are in danger and so on. This was pulling wool over our eyes. How good are they really? How many people do they really try to get out? And what would they sacrifice in terms of bureaucracy and so on and so forth to get them out? This is where I get very angry, because we've had this before. We had working for German and International Pen, for Heinrich Böll House, where we had scholarship recipients. We could not get out of Africa because the politicians and their embassies were afraid they would stay in Germany. They were coming in for 1 or 2 years, and of course, many couldn't go back. But this was a trickle of people who were trying to get out. No, they were, first of all, they wanted some safe place to keep on writing or keep on painting or keep on making music. And that is where I must say, wherever we could, we got them out. And sometimes we got them out also by sophisticated means. Meaning we went against all aspects of do's and don'ts.
Mm-hmm. By hook or by crook.
Right. Sometimes we did that openly, sometimes clandestinely, and I had no qualms of being subversive in trying to help people to survive.
I mean, I've long been of the opinion that political analysis, which comes through to us at the sort of in the mass public view, is inherently flawed. And I'll use the examples of the 2016 US election, where they said essentially that most women will vote for Hillary Clinton. Most African Americans would also vote for Hillary Clinton because that's the way that it seems to be the case. And then after the election, they found out that actually, 1 minute, a very sizable portion of these groups also voted for Trump. And it always reminds me of my days when I was working in the Armenian community, because from outside, people would probably say, oh, look, these guys are so united. They all go to church, they have their schools, they have their community centers, they organize their events and parties. And people would say, they're wonderful, they're all united. But the truth is that most of these little communities, whether they are Armenian or Jewish or African in origin or any other kind of community, they have their divisions. They have different kinds of groups within them with different interests, different characters. And it really gets on my nerves when people say, oh, but they're just Brits. They're all like that. Yeah. No, there are divisions. There are differences.
And then you have the blind eye of the politicians who cannot analyze correctly because they think in terms of their own priorities when they look at at another country. I'm thinking also of the embassies. I'm thinking of the secret services. I've heard people from the Secret Service say the dumbest things about what is happening in Germany, for instance, or even what was happening in England when I was living there, or in America. They were not necessarily the brightest. They were not necessarily the most informed, because they had all blind spots, like we all have. But nobody would put the burden on us to believe everything we say. I hope not, because they should think for themselves. But we were supposed to listen and believe everything the embassy said, everything the secret services said, and so on, or the government.
No.
And this has been eroded.
Oh, definitely. I mean, if we look back through the last, it really depends on when you begin this trend. But if we look at, for example, elections from 1945 onwards, we would see it, generally speaking, okay, there are one or two exceptions, but generally speaking, the level of participation for elections has dwindled bit by bit, year on year. The number of people that engage in a political process has gone down. Political party affiliation has gone down year on year, more or less. Trade union membership and activism has gone down, more or less. And at the same time, the lack of faith with regards to politics, politicians and political institutions, that has increased because of a greater level of awareness, the information age, the internet. We are more aware of what is happening. The scandals are more public, are more immediate. So, there is a correlation between, I suppose, the increase in education that followed after the Second World War, increase in awareness, and the dissatisfaction of the populace.
The populace are better educated, which I think is the most important part, because distrust and a dislike of political action has been with any kind of socio-political community through the ages. The only thing is we are more aware of what is going on around us in a superficial way. We don't know the depth of the differences and the depth of the shenanigans and the depth of what is happening. We know a lot, but we know a lot of bullshit stuff sometimes.
I think quite often, also because we're fed it so thoroughly that we chew it out and regurgitate it ad nauseum. It is. It's a trying situation.
I think for me, it was always the way out was to look at several papers, to look at several stations, and I stayed out of the social media. Very, very fully.
I can appreciate that. I mean, I sort of jumped in to some elements of social media, not straight away, but after a few years. And then I had to withdraw myself completely. And I've only tentatively taken some sort of very, very small steps back in. But I've allied myself to book groups, for example, the Wheel of Time, or I'm following specific authors and people who are fans of authors, because I find these groups to be safer. I find these groups to be welcoming. I find these groups to be respectful of people who have a certain knowledge within the story, because they appreciate the journey that other people have shared.
Absolutely.
And that in itself is fascinating as just a social concept, because you've walked the same path with regards to reading a certain kind of book. People
selection of your readers and the selections of those you listen to, I think is very important, and I think we have to learn that by not just by the years, but by the experience of what is happening around us. And I think there are certain things I would like the press to do, to be more looking across über den Tellerrand hinaus, across the borders that confines them, and politicians to sometimes shut up earlier. Sorry.
Yeah, no, I think.
But you know what I mean.
Right. Yeah. As in, I think I've done a number of different kinds of sessions, communication sessions. It's not just English language. It's also anti-discrimination. It's also communication and so on. And, the key piece of advice that I've always given, and I always will continue to give, is listen. Listen to what people say, because to simply jump in with an opinion, no matter how intelligent that opinion is, if it's not respectful or aware of the people with whom you are communicating, it has no value.
Yes. Listen, learn, and look around, not just your own front yard, but look out and think in terms of other cultures. We have the benefit of having so many cultures accessible in our country, and nobody really goes out to make contact and make friends and learn, because we have to learn from all of the people in our country, and everyone in our country has to learn from us.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we've been as Europe, as a continent, struggling with integration. Immigration isn't the problem. It's integration that has raised challenges, conflicts.
Yes.
And the problem is that there's never really been a proper policy of integration. And that only stems from, I think, a lack of effort, a lack of interest from the authorities. And as you say, if we have people that move into our building or our street, go and welcome them, find out who they are, what they're like,
Yes.
what kind of interests they have, what language they speak, and so on. And then you automatically knock down barriers.
Absolutely. And it's true in better parts of the town as it is in less affluent parts of town. You can do that in a house like mine for stories, and I'm just now planning an evening with something to drink and to eat, to have all of them here to get to know the newest accumulation in our group of people in the house. He comes from Argentina. I've done that since I moved in here. Every time a new person came in, I invited everybody, and then it went around later for an evening meal or snack and a drink, just to exchange ideas and get to know one another, which I think is so important. That is, I think this I haven't done that for quite some time now, because the last people who moved in there came about 5 years ago. So in 5 years, I haven't done it. And it's amazing that not everybody picks up on it. And I have not heard from many people around town that they are doing that in their own vicinity, to get to know people. And the best thing to get to know is to sit down and talk and look at the face and have a drink. And since I am not, I can't really move about as I want to, and I cannot stand as long as I want to, so cooking, whatever, I simply order sushi and have a couple of bottles of wine and some coffee and some tea, and see what happens. In the beginning, when I moved in, we had lots of children here. This is a house where 15 children were born. And there were times when I was the resident grandmother with 3 baby phones at once.
Wow.
So it always was something very much alive. And that's why I felt very, very comfortable here in Cologne. But I learned to be neighborly in America, not in Germany. In Germany, you invite friends and relatives, but not neighbors you don't know or you don't associate with. In America, that's a pioneer country. Everybody who moves anywhere needs to be sure that they're accepted if they need help. You know, if they moved west, and there was a hut, they needed to be sure that they got something to eat and some place to sleep. So hospitality is one of the big assets of America. And I learned that with a very, very open heart, because my mother was that same way. So here I could really move freely and without any restrictions from people around saying, "Why are you doing this?" Nobody asked why I was doing it. They joined in America as they do here.
And
So
also, yeah, I
yeah.
mean, also it's interesting you raised the story or the term pioneer, because the pioneers found safety in numbers to be
Yes,
the only way in which they could survive in unknown territory. And so,
absolutely.
and this is where the term circling the wagons comes from.
Mm-hmm.
And while you were speaking, I also thought, so recently there's been a sort of technological movement that has begun called safe circles, which targets the creation of sort of startup technologies which can be used to provide women and girls safety, either in their place of work or home or education,
Mm-hmm.
because there have been not only over the last few years, but since time immemorial, an extremely unequal amount of abuse, both physical, sexual, and verbal, towards women. And so that this idea is to create safe circles, of creating safe space, and by making yourself known to your neighbors, to your immediate vicinity, you also come to understand where you can go when there is a need.
Yes. Yes.
And I think that is an automatic consequence of breaking down the barriers,
Mm-hmm.
which you have so successfully done.
Well, I must say I'm also doing this as a thank you to my neighbor. When she moved into the next door about a year and a half ago with her children, and the boy was playing basketball, and I had been playing basketball during my college years, and he was looking for his ball, and he had came up and said whether he could have the key and look in our small garden, and he didn't find it. Anyway, I told him that I was very happy that I could hear him playing basketball, and he went back to his mother and told her about me. And before, or just at the beginning of the COVID scare, she called. She rang the bell, and she came halfway up the stairs, and she said, my son has told me, and we talked a bit, and she told me a bit about herself. I told her a bit more about myself. And then all of a sudden she said, my kids and I are always there if you need us. It blew my mind. Because none of my German neighbors had ever said anything. In the house, I knew I can call, and of course we help each other. But none of the neighbors from anywhere around here came up with that clear statement. Hey, we're here, and that really, really, really touched me.
Mm.
And again, she was born in Belgium. Her father is Russian Finnish. Her mother, I think, is Belgium. She's an IT specialist. So we had a lot of things to talk about in the beginning. And this is why I'm so happy, because, of course, she's invited along with her a friend who is now living in our house. And I'm really, really looking forward to get those guys and girls together.
Yeah, wonderful. Karin, I look up and I see the time, and we've already gone through the 1 hour barrier. And I think every single time we've spoken, I'm almost surprised when I see that we've gone through the 1 hour barrier without even noticing that we have done so. So entertaining is it indeed to hear these stories. I do like this idea where we sort of pick a word and then follow the journey, the natural journey that this word takes us to. So I think you're onto something there.
we'll find other topics, I think,
Oh,
that the world around us will support us and deliver them.
yeah, absolutely. And I also, I
And you
think,
have
yeah,
you
sorry.
have to apologize if I go off on a tantrum someplace and go sideways and move to one-way roads and so on and so
No,
forth.
no, no,
But
no.
it's fun. It's
This
fun.
Yeah, and this podcast is the epitome of democracy, because you are completely free to do so, and we like it. I like it, and a lot of people who I've spoken to, very much appreciate your insight and thoughts on all of these topics. What would also be good would be to, because I mean we both love books, would be to mention some of the books that we have that we're reading at the moment, or that we have to read in our lists of books. Are you reading something at the moment that you'd like to?
I'm reading again the second part of Margaret Atwood's handmade series of two. I'm reading the Testaments, which is the beginning of the end of the of Gilead, the autocratic and anti-feminist and anti-women and anti-democracy and anti-everything country that developed in as a theocracy in America, because it fascinates me. Her first book, The Handmaid's Tale, was written in 1985, which basically gives us a guideline through what is happening in Afghanistan, or what happened in Afghanistan and will be happening. And the second one, the Testaments, came out just a couple of years ago, and it's the implosion of this repressive state and the development into a more humane society. And this is why I'm rereading it. I'll see what I read afterwards, and I should know by next time or even before, and I give you my word. I'll give you a call and tell you when I know what I'm going to read next time.
Okay. All right. Yeah, fascinating. Margaret Atwood, I've made a note, and I'm familiar with A Handmaid's Tale. I haven't read it, but I have now added it to my list. I myself am reading a book called Woman in the Wilderness by a Dutch lady called Miriam Lancewood, who it's a true story. She left society to live in the mountains of New Zealand with her husband, a professor who decided to leave academia. And this is essentially the story of how they managed to overcome the leap from civilization to nature. And it's a fascinating read. And she has also wonderful insights. So yeah, I recommend that as well. Wonderful. Okay.
I'll see what I can do, what I can come up with. If you have time, read some of Robert Seethaler's books. They're easy to read. They're not 500 pages. There are stories about people at the fringe of our society, and they're dealt with care and with loving. Okay. So it's not the utopia. It's making a go of what we have, so to speak. And his writing, I've never felt that I was moving so smoothly to good literature as I do with him.
Okay, Robert Seethaler. Is he the Austrian author you were referring to?
He's the Austrian, yes.
Yeah, okay, yeah. All right. I have made a note. Karin, what can I say? Thank you very much for your time, your energy, your thoughts. And yeah, I'm looking forward to our next session already.
My love to you and yours, all of yours.
Thank you too. All the best.
All the best until then.
Mike. Two and Mike.